So here we are. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to our working artist coaching call with our very special guest today. Our special guest is Michael Pierre Price, who is a working artist, just like us. Michael works in digital mediums and he describes his work as abstract, algorithmic, and surreal. I think it is fantastic in every sense of the word. And Michael has agreed to talk to us about AI, artificial intelligence, and art. So this is a very special edition of our coaching call, and I'm excited to hear the question, to hear what Michael has to say. I've been doing a deep dive into AI these past few weeks, and I find it both terrifying and exciting at the same time. So I'll be really interested to hear what he has to say. So Michael, I'm turning it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Krista. So let me begin by sharing my screen here. And I'm actually, does everybody see my Lightroom screen?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm going to go full screen here.
Good.
So I guess I really want to start by hopefully giving an easy to follow overview of what AI art is, at least in this current time frame of 2023. It's an evolving concept and tool, and I think there's a lot more potential that's going to be happening in the future. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there as well. And I think that's because the underlying technology can feel like a black box where you just press a button and out comes artwork, and that can feel threatening. And for a lot of people, they don't quite understand necessarily what might be going on behind the scenes. So here's what I want to kind of go through today. And I'm happy to answer questions along the way, or if we have a natural pause point, or Krista, if you see any questions being asked that would be good to bring up, feel free to step in. So our human brain is a fantastic mechanism. It is wildly efficient in terms of energy use, and it is so adaptable. We're still learning and understanding more and more as time goes on. And this is actually a hand-drawn mapping of just a very small part of the synapses and the axons and the neurons and all the interconnections in just a very, very small part of a brain. And you can see that it looks rather complex, and it is. But it's been a fantastic model for computer scientists, mathematicians to think about and utilize in a lot of ways, not only for creating art, but for use in industry, in the medical industry, and in other purposes for text, music, etc. So hopefully I won't freak out anybody too much, going back to probably like junior high or maybe high school in terms of biology and how all this stuff works. But basically, neural networks, the computer models, follow very closely to how the brain neurons work and the connections. And what you see is that electrical impulses get passed from neuron to neuron. And in popular jargon, we've heard a lot recently about neuroplasticity and creating neural pathways when we learn. And so this is very much akin to some of the upper level structures in computing neural networks. So this is a very small sampling of a neural network example, and I wanted to bring it up to show an example of how this might be worked on in a sample neural network using text to create AI images, which is what we're really focusing on today. And so, for instance, if I was giving the AI what's known as a prompt, which is a text message, and say, I want to create a Fauvist animal portrait. Well, for those of us who know a little bit about art history, Fauvism was a movement in the early 20th century that was really kind of short-lived in a lot of ways, but it used bold colors. So these ideas here, the AI has to parse my text and try to understand what it is I'm asking it to do. So if you look at the pinkish circles here, these would be the initial neuron inputs for the AI. And so, for instance, when I'm looking at this idea of a Fauvist animal portrait, this particular neuron may focus on color. And so the idea of what's green, and here, what's a cat? Now, language is highly symbolic, and a cat can mean a whole lot of different things. Is it a Maine Coon cat? Is it a wild cat? What's green? There are various types of greens. So what happens is in the AI, these ideas get moved along in a wide network. And so these inputs get weighted, and these neurons have specific concepts or ideas that are taking these inputs. They're doing a formulation and saying, okay, here's what green, here's what cat means to me. I'm going to send this out to this output neuron here. This is happening with this neuron and this neuron. If you think about millions and millions of connections happening, finally, we get to something that looks like green cat. I put a sub-1 here because this is just a very small subnetwork, and that then outputs to something that might be meaningful. So that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes. AI approaches have been evolving over time. A few years ago, one of the most advanced neural networks for going from text to image, what was known as a generative adversarial network. And basically, there were two AIs going on together, competing with one another. You had real data. So this was data pulling imagery from the internet. And in that real data, if my prompt example in this time is an impressionist painting of Saturn, well, in the real data, it would be pulling images of Saturn. Now, that could be the planet Saturn. It could be a Saturn car. It's going to be pulling ideas of impressionism. Which impressionist artists are we talking about? Post-impressionism, all of those things. And what's a painting? Is it an oil painting? Is it graffiti? So a lot of those ideas are part of this neural network that has to discriminate down what the heck I meant by an impressionist painting of Saturn. Now, the neural network itself generates potential candidate images. And that's what this generator network does based on my prompt. So then it feeds this image then gets fed into the discriminator neural network. And if you look at my kind of very primitive hand drawing of Saturn, it comes in and says, does this look like a real image that would fulfill an impressionist painting of Saturn? If it says, nope, no way, that's terrible, We don't like that at all. That then says, okay, that's a fake image. It's learned from that. It now knows that if it sees this, the discriminator says it's fake. So now the generator says, oh, I created a fake image. I have to improve somehow. How can I improve? What am I going to do? So this process keeps getting repeated and repeated and repeated until finally the generator AI network creates something that the discriminator says, that's plausible. That looks like that could be real. If that's true, it outputs that and it gets shown as, here's an impressionist painting of Saturn. Now, the thing is, that's one of many potential candidates that the discriminator could finally say that looks real, that looks like a probable realistic final image. And that's where you get lots of different images being able to satisfy this notion of an impressionist painting of Saturn. That's how generative adversarial networks work, because the generator and the discriminator are fighting each other, and there can only be one winner. And depending on who wins out, either the process repeats or it moves along and you go from there. In the last couple years or so, there's been a much improved model that's being used, which is known as a diffusion AI neural network. This one is a little more tricky to maybe understand, but it's very important because it addresses, I think, some of the controversies rather full on. And this is important to understand where this notion of AI art is stealing from artists. And we'll talk about that in just a couple minutes, but I need to explain this model now. So let's say, again, we've got our impressionist painting of Saturn. Over on the left here, I've got my prompt that I'm including. In this model, what happens is, through millions or billions of images that have been collected, each image has text associated with it that are descriptor words that go with that image. That's either directly taken from the data associated with that image, or it's been actually included by people who work on this stuff as well. So the idea of impressionist painting Saturn would be part of text that might be associated with images that it's looking at. What happens is there are 3 neural networks in this overall network. There's the text encoder, there's the diffusion network, and then there's the image decoder network. The text network encodes what text prompts are given and creates numerical values. It creates a mathematical space for these text inputs that can then be utilized as what are known as tokens that looks at all of the images that have been scoured from the internet. And those images are only relevant when these tokens can match up in some way with this diffusion model. Now, here's the tricky part. How does the diffusion model work? All right. I want to give hopefully an example that might help with this. Let's say you're out in nature, it's early morning and it's really, really foggy, and you're trying to look in the distance and the fog is so thick you can barely make anything out. Let's say the fog starts to clear a little bit, just a little bit, and you start to see what look like some dark vertical columns or pillars. If you're in nature and you don't think there are any buildings around, you might start to think, I'm maybe seeing tree trunks. Everybody following me so far, I hope? So as the fog starts to clear a little bit more, you see things that maybe look like branches. or maybe you see some hills because you can start to see definition. This is how the diffusion model works in AI. What happens is all of the images, the discrete images that have been detected and part of this model, each one of them gets added more and more noise to until they become completely noisy, that you can't make anything out. This diffusion model then starts to let a little less noise happen, and it looks to see, can I detect anything? What does this diagonal line look like? Does it look like the start of a mountain? Does it look like the formation of the building? And it does that for all these billions of images, and it looks for ones that look similar to one another. And then, so it's basically a pattern recognition that the AI goes through as less and less noise happens. So if it gets to the point where it says, this looks enough like this kind of object, does that fit the text that I'm looking for? If it does, then it starts to glom onto that, and then it starts to create patterns with that then goes further and further. And it has to match that with millions and billions of images that fit within the mathematical space for the text encoder has. Okay, so as that process gets further and further along, it gets something that looks very definitive. And if it gets to the point where that processed image looks good enough, it then goes to the decoder. And then that finally comes out to the end. There's more to it than that. I'm just trying to stay at a very high level so that I don't get too bogged down, in computer science-ese here. I'm hoping everybody's sort of following where I'm coming from here. Now, what's important with this is that this diffusion model works well only when there's enough, where there's a threshold that's reached so that it has enough data to be able to make these pattern recognitions so that it can say, this is a mountain, this is a tree, this is a Jackson Pollock abstract expressionist painting. This is Van Gogh paint, paint style. And all of those things finally happen through this process. Now, here's the tricky part. This information is relied upon through a number of processes. And so the part is, a lot has been scoured from the internet that people who have potential proprietary rights or copyrights to their work, whether it's photographers, artists, people who do stock photography, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that haven't given permission for these images to be part of this diffusion model. That's one thing. The other thing is, as we all know, there are potential implicit biases that can come about through just grabbing stuff off the internet. And it can be overrepresentation by male artists versus female artists. It can be overrepresentation about Eurocentric art versus other art forms. What is considered imagery. So there's all kinds of things that we need to be aware of, and there's also implicit biases in the way the text encoder works, and a way that the diffusion model looks at understanding things. So we're still in the early stages of this, is what I'm saying. And so if there are any questions about this before I move on, I'm happy to answer that. If we want to have a broader discussion on the notion of theft of AI art, I think that could be a big topic, and maybe that's better left after, as I move on. But if there's anybody who had any questions on what I was just explaining, like you don't quite understand something, I'm happy to rephrase it, but I'm hoping at least it's a modicum of understanding that it's starting to make a little bit more sense to you if you're completely unfamiliar with the topic.
I'm not seeing any raised hands. You guys can unmute yourself if you want to jump in with a question. I'm not ready to ask questions yet. It's
okay.
it's interesting, but it's wow. Okay.
Okay, so I've been using AI in a number of different ways, and I'm going to get to that as a separate topic in just a little bit as well. But I've been interested in, for the creation of my own artwork, I pretty much use, when I do use AI, it's a step along the way. So it's part of a larger process that I follow. So one of the earlier programs that I used is this VQ GAN plus clip. It's an open source protocol, so it's a little tricky to use at times, but it's rather interesting. So I wanted to show 3 examples of work, AI enhanced artwork that I've created using VQ GAN plus clip. And this was in 2021 and 2022 that I was working with this primarily. Everybody seeing this okay? All right. So these are fairly abstract because this model for me helps me work in some of the abstract ideas that I was working on. This was one that I wanted to use geometry and the idea of wiping the geometry around with wind and storm. That's where the fog idea comes into play with this as well. And this last one is another abstract. It actually was inspired by some song lyrics from the band Bauhaus. For any of you folks back in the 80s and the new wave punk era might remember them. Anyway, so next I went to disco diffusion, and this became pretty popular in the early 2022 last year. I know it's kind of funny to think about some of this stuff only last year, because it feels like a long time ago, since this whole avenue has been, the technology just keeps changing at a very quick clip here. Again, disco diffusion uses the diffusion model that I was talking about just last in my explanation, and it's another open source protocol that you use Google for to get onto their platform. So let me show you just a few examples here. Here, the prompts that I tend to use are very experimental. I'm using the AI in a very idiosyncratic way that I think a lot of other people aren't using, because I'm not interested in like the purple gorilla holding a yellow balloon looking at a Van Gogh painting. People tend to be very literal using AI right now because it's very easy to do. I see it as kind of the equivalent of modern photography, when photo apps became very popular on our smartphones, and still are. And yes, you can create really interesting art with smartphones, but 99% of smartphone photography is pretty rudimentary and everyday, selfies and such. So what this one, I've been experimenting with dreams and seeing whether AI can help get some dream landscapes that I've been working through, and this was one example of that. This was an interesting one. I've always been enamored with Da Vinci's Last Supper, and seeing how people have taken their own take of it. And so this was mine, working with Disco Diffusion, and I called this the final repast of the condemned. So this is Jesus and the disciples at the last meal here. So that, and I actually used a photograph of Da Vinci's piece to help initiate this.
Michael, can you tell us some of the prompts that you're using?
Sure. That was the prompt that I used for this one, the final repast of the condemned. And actually the names of these have this one was what did I call this? Monstrous Dreams Echo Beyond Conscious Reality. And this one here.
Your titles are your actual, I'm sorry, your titles are your actual prompts. That's what you're saying. Some
of them are, yeah, or a good portion are, yes.
Interesting. Okay.
So this one is called Homage to the Bird Gods, #1. This was actually on display at a recent gallery exhibit in Australia. A friend of mine did both digital displays and actual displays. This one was displayed digitally. This was another experiment for me. I've always been interested in the cave paintings, whether it's Lascaux or elsewhere. And I've been interested in primitive humans creating art from nature, and how we might have anthropomorphized gods and other things in nature. So for me, this was, I wanted to create something with the AI that would take bird skulls, bird wings, and other things, and put them together kind of like on an altar. And that's what this piece was about. Okay, so I've been working in Midjourney quite a lot most recently over the last year, or well, 9 months, I would say. I played around with it a little bit, and then I was approached by an organization that is in the process of using NFTs to create funding for sponsoring medical research into more easily affordable pharmaceuticals. So things that are not patentable or easily patentable. And so I created late summer, early autumn of last year, 1,001 NFTs using Midjourney. And hopefully that's going to become, you'll be able to see them eventually sometime. I'm guessing maybe now late first quarter this year or second quarter, depending on how the crypto market is going. So anyway, that got me very immersed in Midjourney itself. So here's a few examples. And The titles of the pieces are pretty much very close to the prompts that I used. So here we go. First one, black holes, Boltzmann brains, and the heat death of the universe. This is a very, very big topic in cosmology, and I'm not going to get into that too deeply here, but this is, for me, sort of a surrealistic interpretation of that idea or those sets of ideas.
There's
Yes.
another question posted. If we put in the same prompts, would we get the same images?
No, that's the thing with AI. Well, let me put it this way. To get the same image, you would have to know what's known as the seed number for creating this image. So most of the commercially available AI generators that are out there, the text to AI generators that are out there, which is what I'm using here and showing you, underneath the hood, part of the randomness is what's known as the random seed generator. And if you know that generator and you explicitly use the exact same prompt, you will get the same image. If you don't, then you're not going to get the same image. You'll get something that fits that criteria that I was talking about, but it will be interpreted differently until it gets to that. So you can, what's nice about this is basically you can use AI as a partner in creating a lot of imagery that you might get inspired to. If you're not a digital artist and you're a traditional artist, but you want to use AI as a way to brainstorm or blue sky new ideas, you could use this and create a whole array of various images. And you might like 2 or 3 out of the 50 or 100 that you create. And those might be starting points for you to create an oil painting or an abstract pen and ink drawing or something. And so that's one of the areas in which I think AI can be an assistant to a traditional artist, as just generating new ideas to go from. You know, we all get writer's block, we all get artist block, and this might be a way for you to unlock new ideas. Put different ideas together that you might not be able to do easily, and come up with something brand new that you wouldn't have thought. And then take that and manipulate it in the ways that you normally might do your artwork. Or you might create an image that you like and use it part of a collage, print it out or print part of it out, and then use that as a collage part of a greater image. So, I mean, this is where AI, I think, can be helpful or a step along the way, even for traditional artists. Yes.
Okay, couple questions. Do you get a random seed generator number for you to use only yourself?
You can. It depends on which platform you're working with and how you might access that. They work differently for each one. With Midjourney, yes, you can look for the information. You have to ask for it, basically, and you can get it. Yes.
Okay, hold on, I missed a question. Are the images you're showing us essentially digital collages?
The images that I'm showing here are final imagery that I created that used these platforms that I've identified which platform I created them on, but I've used Photoshop, I've used a number of other things. These are all images that I have for sale either on my website or that I've created to print. So these have all been upscaled and manipulated on my end to be able to print them out. Now, when I talk about upscaling, people who are photographers probably know what I'm talking about. If you're a traditional artist, you may not. So let me explain this. The AI images natively are all pretty small images, like 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. Some go higher if you're paying to use these platforms, but they're still pretty small overall. So for me, if I'm printing out, like say for instance, this image here, this one I printed out, or I created it as an 18-inch by, I think 18-inch by 18-inch image, and my when I natively print out, I'm printing at 300 pixels per inch. So that's 5,400 pixels in the horizontal direction, 5,400 pixels I have to be able to account for to my printer to create this image. So I have to upscale from the small image to create the larger image. And that's not an easy thing to do. And there's a lot I have to do on my end to keep the integrity of that smaller image at a larger scale for it to print, so that it's not going to look pixely, that it's not going to look fuzzy, that it's going to feel like an appropriate image that I would make. And so I have to do things along the way to make that happen.
And you're doing those things within Midjourney.
I'm doing it out of Midjourney. Midjourney.
Okay.
So Midjourney gives me what I like to say, Midjourney or all the other AIs that I work with, they give me a seed, and I have to grow that seed into a final image. And I use Photoshop to do that. I use some other techniques. And I don't want to get too heavily into that process at the moment. I'm happy to talk about that more if other people want to understand that process. But see, for me, I'm not trying to create an image that's just going to be looked on somebody's cell phone, or that's just going to be looked on somebody's computer screen as a background image or something. For me, I'm going old school. I want to print my work because I want them to hang on somebody's wall or in a museum or whatever. And that's where I'm coming from for my artwork.
Okay. Let me get some of these questions. Yeah, can you go back a bit? I'm behind on the questions here. So how much of this current image is AI? Did you start this and then enhance it?
I would say that's a interesting question. I would say if you looked at the small image and you look at this image, I would say that it's probably about 85% close to the original Midjourney imagery. There were elements of it that I had to interpret and that I wanted to bring out. Anybody who knows, if you work small versus when you start to work larger, an image can look really nice small, and then when you blow it up, the proportions, what your eye goes to, what your eye says is important, can be very different at a smaller size versus a larger size. And I have found that over the years that when I work, I have to print my work at the size that I've thought that it works at. And sometimes I'm wrong. Most times now, because of years and years working at this, I have a good sense of what scale is right, what I've been thinking about. Sometimes I get surprised, that still happens, but typically I know what image. In other words, I do not create my image to be at various sizes. What I print is what I print. It's the size what it is. I know other digital artists will offer prints at different sizes. That's fine. that works for that person. It doesn't work for me. What I print at is the scale that I wanted, and that's the image. It is what it is.
Okay. We're getting a couple questions, and it might not fit into the time we
Okay.
have. People are
Okay.
asking, people are curious about your process. They want to see what a seed
Oh,
image
okay.
is and how you work on it,
All
but
right.
we can do that
Oh,
later if you don't.
no, let me quickly go through these images, and then I can do a demo of
Okay,
Midjourney.
awesome.
So I'll just go quickly through these because I just wanted to show some examples.
Okay, I'm going to close the chat.
And if anybody wants me to go back to something, that's fine. And then this last one that I wanted to show was a combination of both DALL-E 2 and Midjourney. I wanted to show an example of something working. Since I showed that you can take an image and bring it into one of the AIs and use that as a starting point for creating alternative images to that. That's something that I've utilized quite a bit as well in my work, and I just wanted to show one example of that. Okay, so let me get out of here. And does everybody see the Midjourney screen?
Yeah.
All right. So this if you excuse me, if you haven't signed up for Midjourney, this is kind of the screen that you get when you sign in. And this shows my Midjourney screen here. And basically I can see an archive of all the images that I've created using Midjourney. Now, this is not the Midjourney tool. This is just a way for me to look and see what I've created. You can, if you want to use Midjourney, you can access it through Discord, which is another program that gamers have used historically. That's a chat program, but it's also a lot more than that. But you can also use the web app for Midjourney as well. So this is kind of the typical interface for Midjourney. I have my own channel here. So all the work that I do is private. Nobody else is seeing it, except for you all right now looking over my shoulder. And basically, you can see a prompt that I've got up here that says Vincent van Gogh walking in the town of Arles, painted by Henri Matisse. So I was thinking about you, Krista, when I did this, thinking about the workshop you did last year. So what I did was I just put that as a prompt into Midjourney, and it creates 4 potential candidates that I can look at. So I'm looking at this now a little bit closer. Now you can debate how good of an image this is or not, but this just gives you an idea. This one was interesting here as compared to the other 3, because this has what looks like a painting on a canvas that's propped up against the building or a wall where there's looks like a wood plank floor here. So for instance, Krista, if you wanted to say, use this as part of an email blast that you want to send out to the working artists, you could potentially use AI to help you generate some interesting images. So if for instance, you like that one and you say, I want to look at this one larger, this set of buttons here, the U's, say, I want to upscale it. This is that upscaling part. Now, it's not going to make it very big, but it's going to make it bigger. So when I do that, I have to come down all the way down here And if you see here, it says I'm upscaling image number 4, which was the one that I selected, and it's working on it right now. So this is happening in real time. Usually it doesn't take very long, but you know, live TV, anything can happen, right? So while we're waiting for that, I'm going to show you a few others that I did in the meantime. So I said that I like to experiment. So here was an experiment that I was playing around with. An erector set, again, I'm dating myself, abstract expressionist oil painting, detailed, high definition, digital art. And here, this AR is a command that says aspect ratio. So I want it to be 2 wide and 3 tall. So this is going to be in a portrait setting. So here's one sample of an erector set abstract expressionist oil painting. You can be the judge how well it's interpreted this or not, but this is what one interpretation of that is. Now I did this several times with several different changes to the prompt. Here I did a minimalist oil painting, and you can see that it's slightly different. It really just focuses on the you know, mechanical parts of the erector set, if you will. Here, I did a pop art style. And again, the structures are different every time. And you can see some of the colors in here have a bit of a pop art feel to them. Here I went for the idea of a cubist painting. They don't do cubism in the strictest sense of how cubists did it, but they make things cube-like. So again, this is an interpretive element here. All right, I heard my prompt give me the message. Okay, so now, oh, did I pick the wrong one? Anyway, this is how it interpreted it. This is the larger size. I might have picked the wrong one. I'm not sure here. Let me go back. Where do we go? Oops, I got rid of it. Okay, so let me go back here to my mid-journey. And let me sign in. So I wanted to show a couple other ways in which you can utilize this. So I want to show you a couple more examples. So here, I decided to use the erector set art, making a giraffe. So that's what I did with these images here. Again, for me, these are just a lot of experimentation for me, things that I may never ever use, but it may spark an idea for me to take something and use elsewhere.
Can I ask you a question, Michael? Do you say that you use digital tools, or are you making digital art?
Oh man, this is a discussion I think you and I have had, but it's one that's really tricky because I consider myself an artist who uses digital tools. I work in a digital medium, but my end product is printed artwork. So, you know, that's a hard one to talk about, because if you're not used to digital artwork or artists working in a digital medium, it can feel very foreign. And this is a conversation, an ongoing conversation that I've had with gallery owners, with other artists who may not understand what digital art is or how it gets made. And so I think it's an ongoing process of education. More and more galleries, mainstream galleries, are interested when they hear about the blockchain. And that's a whole nother conversation. But Web3 and all these other emerging technologies that we're still very in the early stages of, are things that are getting more and more eyeballs and more interest from what I would consider traditional venues. But it's still not easy to talk about, because you almost have to define terminology as you go along in your conversation. And that's not always easy to do. It can bog down conversations because people feel like, well, my end product is a digital file. So is that the artwork? And I say no, because for me, my artwork is a final printed piece on the paper that I use. I either in under glass and matted and framed, or just framed and so that's not an easy one to answer necessarily. But it's a good conversation to have, because it's something that's still out there.
Yeah, it's prompting some questions, but okay, go on.
So one more demonstration I wanted to do very quickly. This is DALL-E 2. So again, here are images that I've created using DALL-E 2. But let's say, for instance, oops.
Is it a coincidence that images from DALL-E are DALL-E-esque?
I think so. You can create a lot that are not.
Okay.
And I'll show that. But let's say erector set, abstract, I had it go. Expressionism, oil painting, and just leave it at that, and compare to see. Now DALL-E natively creates square images, but this is another tool that you can create images from. Now this is something I want to another conversation. So I say that all the AI tools that I work with create images. I have to take that image and create artwork. And I make a distinction there between that. Where do we go? Oh, it's still working. Oh no, it's still working, I guess. Okay, so for me, it's a matter of taking the AI and utilizing it, and then creating a final image that I say is my art. Now, I claim it at that point. I stick by that and say, this is a Michael Pierre Price artwork. Now you could come to me and say, but Michael, you used AI to help you create that. That's fraud, that's forgery. You're welcome to your opinion. I do what I can not to take other people's artwork. And that's why I say, for me, I do a lot of experimentation here at a high conceptual level. I don't know under the hood in the engine when it's creating what it's looking at, what it might be using to get me that final output. But I don't go in and say, give me an image that looks like it's going to be this artist or that artist. So here we are. Here are the 4 images that Dali created as an erector set abstract expressionist oil painting. Now you can see stylistically, this has a different potential look than what I was creating with Midjourney. They do have some styles to them. And Disco Diffusion has its style and others. That again is something that each artist has to look at. How do you make it yours? What are you looking at to make it yours? So if you looked at one of these and you said, wow, that's kind of interesting, I could use that as a starting point for something. Or you could take, if you're a digital artist, you could take this in to Photoshop and start manipulating it, using other brushes, using other things, changing the color palette, whatever. And those are the kinds of things that I end up doing. I don't know how we're doing on time, Krista. So
I've got some more questions here. How can we protect existing art? How can we protect existing art?
Okay, so that's an intriguing question. And I come back to, all right, what do you mean by protect, number one? Mm-hmm. And what is it that you're worried about? So if protect means you do not want any image that you've ever created to be potentially swept up by DALL-E or OpenAI or some of the other companies using the internet to scrape images. Don't be on social, don't show any of your work on social media. Don't show your work on your website. Don't be online at all with any of your work. That's the only way you can guarantee that your work might not be collected up in this. That's the only way, at least right now. So if you're worried about that, what is it that you're worried about? This idea of theft. If I had this image on the internet, this one that I'm showing on screen that I just put up here with DALL-E, and I decided, hey, I wanted to create this as a final image, and I used it pretty close to this. If it gets swept up and it gets utilized by Midjourney and other players out there, this image is going to get ascertained by associated text. So it's going to be looked at potentially as an oil painting, a digital art piece. Maybe the erector set idea is in there, color palette, et cetera, et cetera. I am not a known enough artist for somebody to come in elsewhere on another platform saying, I want to create an oil painting like a Michael Pierre Price digital artwork. Now, maybe at some point in time down the road, that might happen. I'm humble enough to know that I'm not a household name, and nobody's going to try to directly steal what is considered my artwork. Can it happen? Absolutely. The more likely theft is for somebody to copy imagery from my website or my Instagram site, steal it directly and put it into Photoshop or some other program and use it that way versus in an AI program. That is much more likely than this art piece being replicated in another AI program, because it's not being stolen directly one for one in that respect.
Right.
Does that make sense? It's being looked at. So this artwork is being looked at with regard to color, with regard to structure, with regard to what kind of artwork it is, with regard to it's not a photograph. So it is, could you interpret this as a cat? I don't know. Maybe in a very weird way you could, because maybe it looks like it has two eyes here in the center. So this is the part of AI where a lot of people don't quite understand this idea of theft. Now,
so is it more, I'm sorry, is it more inspiration than theft then? Is that what?
The problem is when the diffusion model is working, it works looking at an aggregate of images. And its understanding of what conceptually, what green means, what a dog means, what abstract art means, it's doing that in a statistical way. It's not doing it as an individual image. So it's like,
okay,
if medical research is looking at your medical data in a statistical model, it can say, at this age, you got to worry about this, this, and this. You may be in that age, but you may have other factors that don't match up. It's the same kind of thing. But now here's the tricky part. People have not agreed to let their particular art pieces be part of this statistical model. So that's the issue, I think, where more known artists who are being used in prompts, because there are some artists who get used over and over and over again for certain types of art styles.
Mm-hmm.
They have a legitimate concern that their art is being potentially utilized to create other styles of art without them being recognized that they were the source for that inspiration. That's a legitimate issue that I think we need to have conversations about. The US government and other governments around the world are way behind the curve on this. And updates to copyright law, updates to what is human created versus strictly machine created, that the dividing line is not so stark. That to me, there's definitely a rainbow here. There's where does one end and where does one start? Yeah.
Can I, because I'm falling really behind on the questions.
Oh, no, okay.
Crazy here. Are you not just using the style of an artist instead of using so you're using the style of an artist, you're not using the actual pieces of the artist, correct?
That's potentially true if you designate that artist in your prompt. For instance, if I had said I wanted the art brush strokes to be like Van Gogh, you can get the very stylistic Van Gogh brush stroke styles in your artwork if you wanted to go that route. The AI will definitely give that back to you in one way or another.
But it can't have the depth. I mean, it's printing flat, right?
Correct.
Okay, so
It
you're never
can-
gonna like,
But, well, let me, because I had to, I apologize for running through this rather quickly. I'm trying to find, okay. This is the one. Okay, so let me see if I can make this. Oh, I probably can't make it larger. Rats. This one did not have the DALL-E style, but it has a very pixely kind of style. But if you look at it, if you were to see this larger, and I'm working on this one as a final piece, it looks like DALL-E did a number of pixelated image style artworks during his career. And some of them are quite famous. And this is much less so than that, but this brings out that digital quality. Now, I did some others. Okay, here's one that I kind of want to show, because these are very interesting. Again, I want to show this as an experiment. This looks pretty abstract, right? So, does anybody know what a stromatolite or a sprigina is or are? These are very early life forms in the evolution of life on our planet. These began life, or were very early formations, billions and hundreds of millions of years ago. I find them very interesting because they're like prototypes before lots of definition happened as life got created. So I'm in the process of creating a bunch of artwork using stromatolites and sprigina. And I find them very beautiful, and I'm manipulating them in ways, again. Now, does this look like potentially somebody's art style? I don't know. I didn't call out any artist on this at all. And so the only art style I wanted was something that had an impasto feel. I wanted the dimensionality to kind of come through there. And I don't know if it does at this small size yet. Yeah.
okay, sorry. I guess what I was asking is, when you print it out, it's not going to be the same as DALL-E, because it's not going to have the texture of a painting.
It's not going to have the, yes,
it's going to have
correct.
the look of that. If
That's
you use
correct.
a 3D printer, and I'm not familiar with 3D printers, I just know them as a myth.
Correct. No,
okay.
I have to use sort of the trick of lighting to get that. I'm gonna stop sharing right now, just so we can kind of all be full screen in case we want to have any conversation.
Let me try to get through some of these questions. I'm sure I missed a bunch, but Jen said something interesting. She said, another approach artists can take is to make your own data set. It allows for deep, consistent inquiry into ideas and aesthetics, and it mirrors concepts like art series, collections, and archives. What does that mean? Do you know?
Yeah, it's not easy to do. It's not straightforward to do. And I don't know if she's here, if she's had experience doing that or not. either you need access to a programming team, or you need to be savvy enough programming wise where you can input all your own data, use that then to generate the AI imagery from there. The tricky part is, with a smaller data set, it means there's a much longer learning curve to get anything meaningful from. And so it's very experimental that way. I fortunately have some friends who are pretty darn good programmers that I'm in the process of seeing if we can work on creating a tool set where I can work much larger natively images. And also to get a better handle on the data set that we're working with. That's something that's a work in progress for me on my end. But I'm not, I understand the theory of it, but I have not tried doing it in a practical sense. So if there's anybody who has actually done that, I'd love to have a conversation either afterwards or via email or something, because it's of interest. And it's an important factor to trying to mitigate this idea of working in data sets that a lot of the work has not been agreed to by any proprietary holders of those images.
And what is a data set? Your own versus entering words?
Okay. So the data set is in that diffusion model part of the diagram that I was talking about.
Okay.
And it's also in the data set of the text, matching it to the imagery that you're supplying it. So there is kind of a cross correlation there. This is where the reason why the mainstream folks that are doing this right now, that are offering it as a tool, have done these humongously large data sets, is that it gets them some good, significant outputs on the back end with computing power that makes sense economically on their end. It still takes a lot of computing power to generate small 1,000 by 1,000 pixel images, but it's much more efficient. In other words, you can generate something in a matter of potentially seconds to a minute, or to maybe a little bit more than a minute. In early days, with the adversarial networks, you could spend tens of minutes to hours to multiple days, depending on the kind of hardware you were working on. People are using the cloud right now because you can generate a lot of horsepower that way, but there are a lot of computers, connected to that cloud to help make all this happen. So behind the scenes, there's a lot of computing power going on.
That's amazing. Here's a question I think that I'm seeing coming up again and again. As I started to study AI, and I started looking at like Chat GPT,
Yeah.
where they're using AI to generate text.
Yes.
And then writers are saying, well, wait a minute, are they going to take my job? Are our computers taking the jobs of writers? And so are computers going to replace artists, is what I was going to ask you, but I want to throw out the answer I found when I was looking at that for text. And it's like, you're not going to be replaced by a robot, but you're going to be replaced by someone who knows how to work the robot. Is that the same for art, for visual art?
It's a good question. And I don't have a direct answer to it. It may become down the road that the definition of an artist changes. What does it mean to be an artist? I think that we can get to the point where, and this is, you know, a lot of deep thinkers, you know, have spent a lot more time thinking about some of this implication down the road than me. But there's this notion of the singularity, and I don't know how many of you may have heard of this term, but this is sort of the fear that at some point in time, AI is going to get ahead of our human intellect to the point where we become insignificant in regards to the tools creating the tools creating the tools creating the tools that we no longer have a handle on. And it becomes a singular point in time where AI is leading us and not the other way around. I don't know if we are smart enough or humble enough to heed that potential warning and look at that as a species. I don't know if we're going to merge with AI and Homo sapiens becomes Homo something else. Who I don't know. I'm humble enough to realize we are so far advanced from 100 years ago to 500 years ago in regards to how our understanding of the world is, what it means to be a human being, what it means to be, you know, the opportunities for women, the, you know, just, you know, what art means. So, you know, abstract art had no fundamental sensibility at all, you know, a couple hundred years ago. You know, it started happening a little bit, but I mean, I don't know. I honestly don't know where I
that's a good answer.
Where I think artists right now distinguish themselves from non-artists are the same way as a musician walking up to a piano. I can hit the keys on a piano and I can maybe play chopsticks, or I can, play something very, very simple that sounds like a very rudimentary song. But I'm not going to compete, against somebody who studied this and who's a professional. And creative individuals, no matter what their mode of creativity is, are going to use tools.
Right.
Don't make our paints few of us make our paints anymore. Do you know what goes in? Do you know all the ingredients in the oils that you use or the acrylics? You know, what's the manufacturing? We don't. When you're creating a water, creating a watercolor painting, once that hits the paper, physics takes over. You're not, if the watercolor ink, expands out from there, you're controlling it maybe to some degree, but physics is also controlling things. There was an argument for a time that Jackson Pollock wasn't a painter. He just
right.
There was
photography. Yeah.
Yes,
there's
exactly.
been throughout. And like someone asked, how will we differentiate original art from digitally seeded art? But artists have always taken their inspiration from something else. There's always been something. It's, no one is born with that database in their head. It always comes from somewhere else. So I see what you're saying. I think,
but there's a lot of fuzziness around here. So don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know where it's going.
Right. We don't know. Yeah.
Because I work in a digital realm, it's where my creativity and my brain, the mad scientist in me that likes to experiment, I find this area interesting, but I see pitfalls. There are stark pitfalls here.
Yeah.
And we need to be cognizant of that.
Right. And we don't have a great track record as a species.
But And somebody, I know you got the one email asking about, AI art can't be art. I disagree.
Mhm.
I disagree with that. I think AI art or AI images aren't necessarily art. I would agree with that. I think art, I think there's something else. It's like a, trying to animate something that's dead. You might be able to send electrical currents through it and, muscles might move, but it's dead and you're trying to fake it. So I think there's some of that, but I think our creativity has to be in our artwork if it's authentic to who we are as artists. And as for me, as a creative being, looking at other people who create work, if any of you says, this is my artwork, if I don't think that you're lying to me, then you've identified that this image is art. It's your art. I may look at it and say, I don't like it, or I'm confounded by it, or I have a reaction to it. But if I say, that's not art, then I'm putting myself as the judge and jury of what art is. And we do that all the time, I mean, internally. But if I don't want to impugn your character or your integrity as an artist, then I'm going to react to it in the way that, is personal to me. And I realize not everybody likes the work that I do. It is what it is. I don't really care all that much. I mean, I want people to like my work and I want them to be interested. And I like engaging people about my work, but it's a big world and we each have our own likes and dislikes, and I respect other people's likes and dislikes.
I
All right,
have
I'm
a
done.
question about that, and maybe this is a place. Let me see if I can think of how to word this question. So you're using media to make your work. A lot of other artists are using, paint on canvas. But photographers are using the real world and they're artists. I'm just trying to, I don't see that AI is not art, or AI art, digitally assisted art is not art if there's a person in the middle, right?
Yes. So again, I think at this point, I can only go, I mean, if somebody, I mean, Duchamp said this toilet here is a work of
Right.
art. It's a ready-made work of art. So
right.
if he was willing to stand by and say that, and he would, the Dadaists were wonderful for this kind of stuff, but that's happened at various points in time. I mean,
Yeah.
I look at Damien Hirst's Shark and I'm left cold by it. It doesn't speak to me specifically. So it's not my, that's not my jam. Is it art? Is it not art? Damien Hirst says it's art. So who am I to argue with Damien Hirst? I mean, he's, Damien Hirst. So and so I guess for me, if somebody is stealing other people's work and they're saying it's their own work, and they declare it as their own work, and we find out, or someone finds out that it's not, and it becomes public, well, then that person is a fraud. And, the art world has been replete with frauds,
Yeah.
in one way or another, way before AI.
For
And,
sure.
but I understand the pitfall of something that's being done by an other that isn't, me right at this moment.
Right.
and
Right.
that I get an image from. And what I do with that image is what I do with that image. And if somebody wants to see how I do, how I work through Photoshop and other things, that may be, a one-on-one Zoom I'm happy to do with somebody. But each artist has to stand by the way in which they do their work. I mean, we steal from each other all the time conceptually.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I need to wrap this up because we're running out of time, but I just wanted to say that every artist has two things that they need to be an artist, I believe. Craft, you have to master your craft. Scott, can you send me an email with that? Because I'm not going to get that. You have to master your craft and you have to develop your voice. So simply using the tools without attention to craft or voice makes you a technician, like any art form, I would say. So as long as we as artists continue to work on our craft and develop our voice and have something important to share, something of meaning, to me, artists are meaning makers. And I don't see how AI can be a meaning maker. So
not AI in and of itself. Neither
right.
can a tube of acrylic paint. Neither can a brush.
Yeah.
You need the intercessor in there. And with AI, with digital tools, it's just a different set of artwork, a different set of art making.
Art making tools. Yeah.
And artists study the masters. You replicate Raphael, or you replicate Salvador
On a good
Dali
day.
or Jackson Pollock. I mean, he had to figure out the consistency of the paint that he needed in order to make his drip paintings. Or if, how do you replicate like Mark Rothko? I mean, sure, you could do a color field painting, but there was something inside Mark Rothko that made those paintings meaningful.
Right.
And an AI can't just on its own have that meaning inside of itself. It can make an image, and you can take that image and therefore add your stamp of meaning on top of it. Yeah.
This, I'm sorry for all the questions that I wasn't able to get to. It obviously has sparked a great deal of thought.
I mean, if anybody is interested, oops, hopefully I won't type my name wrong. If anybody's interested in like emailing me or want to follow up,
there's Michael's email address
to respond to emails. Michael at michaelpierreprice.com.
That's very, very generous of you, Michael. Thank you. So that's where people, is that where you want to, is that where people can find your work? Is Michael Price?
At michaelpierreprice.com. Yeah.
michaelpierreprice.com.
Yeah, that's
everyone.
my website.
So write that down.
Yep.
I think you're going to get a lot of questions.
Oh, that's fine. No, that's fine.
I wish this is one of those conversations that like we all need to be together with bottles of wine. We'll be up all night, arguing.
Exactly.
And these are the kinds of conversations that were happening 109 years ago, pretty much exactly, when Marcel Duchamp showed the toilet seat, when modernism was introduced in a big way. These were, people were taking to the streets. They were furious. And right now I can see there's a lot of scare and a lot of fear. A lot of people are scared, but for me, this conversation has really opened my eyes, calmed me down, actually gotten me inspired and excited. Where we can find Michael, where to look at his work. I think it's been such a pleasure.
And if one last thing, and I meant to put this last slide up, but I'm not going to do that. But if anybody wants to know some of the various AI programs that are out there, I've got a list, and I'd be happy to. We could either post it on the Working Artist or something too, Krista. I mean, I whatever is
You
easiest.
can post anything on the coaching call page,
Okay.
and we'll leave it up there, you know,
Okay.
at least through this next month, maybe two,
All
depending
right. Okay.
how we go. That
And
would be great. There's
most of them have free. They allow you to create AI free for a little while, then they'll stop and want you to pay. And there are some that are completely free.
Okay, great.
So yeah,
It's
you can get
interesting time.
your
You guys are, from the little bit I've been learning about AI these past few weeks, our world is about to just, we thought it changed like this when the internet came along. It's going to do it again. And, let's all just learn what we can and stay true to who you are, and don't get caught up in fear and stories of what could happen. Right now, it's a tool. It's a tool. It's a really interesting tool, and maybe it'll help dig us out of some of these problems that we have right now. Michael, there's so many notes in here saying thank you. You've explained this really well. The subject's so complex. You've done a beautiful job.
Thank
Everyone
you.
has just really enjoyed it. So
I'm
yeah,
honored.
bravo
Thank
to
you.
you. Yeah, let's give them a virtual yay.
Thanks.
It's been wonderful.
I was hoping not to be too academic, but there's some things that just felt like you needed to understand, and hopefully you have a little better understanding or clearer understanding. But thanks, everybody. I appreciate the chance.
Michael, thank you again. Thank you everyone for being here. And this has been, we could have gone another hour and a half easily. There's so much to talk about here. I really appreciate it.
Awesome.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.